Hello and welcome to another Blue Monday TWTD collaboration show, a mini special to review the questionnaire results, the 2021 questionnaire results. And joining me is Phil Hambert. Phil, I thought whilst we've got you here, given you're the man with his finger on the pulse at TWTD Towers, we've got to get you some views on the latest news. Firstly, how's things? All good?
Yeah, all good with me. Thank you very much. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm perfect. I'm warm and hot and waiting for thunderstorms later on, which will be exciting. So I guess the kind of biggest bit of news of the week is Andre Dizzel's departure, and kind of pivoting off that is it's gone a little bit quiet on the transfer front. TWTD obviously went with the Raheem Harper story pretty early doors, and you know there's like the TWTD trademark of transfer stages. Can you give any reassurance to anyone on what you're hearing on that in terms of imminency, and obviously any thoughts on Andre Dizzel's departure?
On Andre, yeah, I think it's a kind of transfer that I think a lot of us are quite sad about in a way, because Andre being, having the surname he had and the heritage with the club and having come through the academy, we all wanted him to do well. But I think his career has sort of stalled a bit at Town, not entirely due to his fault. I thought there was a long period. Obviously, he had that remarkable debut where he somehow managed to kind of replicate his father scoring on his debut at 16, although Jason will point out that he was considerably younger when he scored his. I think, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think Andre was fairly near 17, whereas Jason was, I think, 16 years and 58 days or something like that.
Right.
But I think there was this, perhaps he had an issue with managers not really trusting him, and he had the odd game here and there. And I think under Mick, I can remember him suddenly being called out from nowhere to start a game at Wigan, and then he had this just out of the blue, not having even been on the bench for the previous few weeks, and then he probably played that game and maybe another one, and then was out the team, and then suddenly he'd reappear again, and the performance would be poor, the team's performance would be poor, and so him as the younger player would be the one who was sacrificed at half time. So he never, for a number of years, I mean, bearing in mind he made his debut at 16 and he's now 22, and this is the first season where he's really played a very large number of games together. He's had a decent run in the team. And obviously he did have that year out with the injury, which was very unfortunate. I mean, that's a big sort of what if, isn't it? If he hadn't got injured against Birmingham on the opening day of the season, when he was playing very well in that game, which I think was 2017.
Yeah, wow, yeah, Birmingham, of course, yeah.
If he hadn't, would he have then played a bigger part that season, a bigger part under Mick the next year or so, and established himself earlier? And then I think under Paul Hurst, he came in back from that injury under Paul Hurst, and I think there was a bit of politics in that sort of period at the beginning of that season where Paul Hurst was trying to persuade Marcus Evans to let him have the money to buy John Nolan. And so there was a lot of this, I don't think Andre's fit enough, I don't think he's ready. We might think about letting him on loan. There was a lot of this. And so I don't think that was very fair on him. And of course, that was then a season which things went awry and we got relegated, and it's quite difficult to bring young players into that circumstance. And then the last two seasons haven't been great by any stretch of the imagination. So he's really found himself in a position where he's trying to make his sort of still to some degree fledgling steps, I suppose. And so and of course he's got this additional pressure that other players haven't got of his surname being Dizel. Yeah, exactly. And whether that's kind of weighed heavy on him a bit, I think perhaps there's been greater expectation on him than there might have been on other players. I think we're all a bit sad that it's never really happened for him here, and that we'd have liked to have been the one scoring, a couple of goals in derby matches against Norwich like his dad did, and celebrating wearing a woolly hat and all that. But perhaps it was a little bit too much to ask of him. Various people have said this to me, ex-players have said this to me, that they think he'll be a better player the higher he goes. And so, that's the test next year. And then perhaps the test in the future, whether he will prove to be a player that can cut it in the Premier League. League One perhaps just doesn't really suit him.
And the £1 million fee is not exactly a kind of an anchor around his neck either in 2021. Sadly, I mean,
no, but again, I think it's a decent fee in this circumstance, really. And I think really that that QPR offered the $1 million because they knew that Blackburn and Brentford and were interested, and probably other people as well. So I think they tried to steal a march on them by offering the fee that triggered the buyout. So yes, but I think QPR is a good next step for him anyway, ultimately. And I think all Town fans wish him well.
Agreed.
He is very much one of our own, isn't he?
Exactly right. Yep. And then on the possible purchases, as I said, it's got
Harper,
and anything else, by the way, because I'm one of these people, and you and I have exchanged emails on this like maybe 10 years ago or something. I really don't like speculating on transfers. Maybe it's like a superstition thing, because as soon as I see a transfer link, it's like, oh, that's not going to happen, and then it's like, it might happen now, and it's a bit further along. It's like, no, well, someone else will come in and outbid us.
I am a little wary on occasions that I kind of know that a transfer is a bit further down the line than I kind of report it as. Do you know what I mean?
So you temper expectations.
A bit of worry that it might get because you a bit of egg on your face. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I said there was a bit of egg on my face with Sonny Bradley, because I said
you weren't the only one though. You weren't the only one. Barring developments or kind of barring someone gazumping us. And actually, I think really in the end, Luton gazumped us in the fact that they play Championship football. Yes.
I think pretty much we'd offered him a contract. He'd said, "Oh, that's all right," and he was kind of up for coming. But I think he had a change of heart. But Raheem Harper, I know he's touching wood. No, I think I mean it is done. From what I'm told, the deal is done. It's just not announced. And whether this is I was anticipating that there would be, or someone told me, and a couple of people told me that the expectation last week was that West Brom would announce their new manager, which was Wagner, wasn't it? The former Huddersfield manager, and of course that all went awry, and I think he went to Young Boys of Bern, I think, didn't he, in the end? And so that announcement didn't get made, and then Town's announcement, and they obviously then the kind of sign off, as it were, to make the announcement of, because I think what they were trying to do, I think they were probably trying to, in the traditional way, bury a bit of what might be perceived as bad news in the wake of
Gazelle story for us, isn't it? I guess perhaps a similar type of transfer, I'd suggest, maybe.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, because I think he's someone that there's been expectation for at West Brom, and he's been seen as a little bit of a star of the future, and links with Premier League clubs and Serie A clubs, weren't there 2 or 3 years ago? So so I think that's perhaps what they wanted to do. But anyway, I think they're in a bit of. Seems fairly chaotic there, doesn't it? You know, the way that the management situation has gone.
They went for Wilder, and then the owner said, no, we don't want Wilder. And then he did a statement, I think, didn't he? Yeah, all very strange. That's not the kind of club you want to be doing transfers with, is it?
No. Well, that happened, and then obviously the Wagner thing broke down, and then there's been talk about Michael Appleton as well, and there's been talk about Alex Neil, hasn't there? And of course the director of football or sporting director of his, he moved on this week, didn't he? Dowling. So it's I think we're sort of doing business with a club that's not very happy with itself at the moment, and I think it will get announced, and he will be a Town player. But
it kind of feels like the buses situation with Wes Burns and. I've forgotten his name already, Lee Evans.
Lee Evans, yeah.
You suddenly think maybe they'll do a kind of what we did last summer, where you had Stephen Ward and Di Cornell and another kind of announced all at the same time.
Ollie Hawkins,
Ollie Hawkins, three in a line with Eric's shirts outside Playford Road, maybe. But.
Yeah. So I don't know where we are on others at the moment. I mean, they've got lengthy lists. They're going through. They're talking to lots of players. I think Paul Cook is fairly ruthless in the way that he does business. It's kind of, he doesn't let players keep him hanging on. I think he says, well, if you're interested, give me a call by whenever, and I want it I want it all kind of done by this date, or I want you to kind of, committed to us and all this kind of thing.
I just wanted to quote this at you from The Athletic, who did a Q&A. I think it was the North America branch of The Athletic with Brett Johnson, just to kind of continue the Paul Cook and the squad building. He was, I'm not sure whether, I think maybe he was more honest and open than he might have wanted to be when asked about the transfer window and the type of business we're doing. We're making wholesale changes is the first thing he said. Long calls with Paul Cook, lots of faith in him. But Paul showed up and there was something like 43 players on the extended roster. I think we're keeping about 10% of them. The question is, how quickly can you bring in so much talent and get it to click, which I guess we're all debating that. But the keeping 10% of the 43 player extended roster is quite a stark number when you hear it, and I guess chimes with all the stuff that Paul Cook has been saying as well. But it has now caused people to speculate who is the lucky 10%, and I guess a nod to a fantastic two-part interview with Alan Lee that's gone out. First episode on Wednesday, just been, and Friday for the second part, where Alan Lee kind of gives an insight, having played with Paul Cook at Burnley, that he's utterly convinced it's mind games to kind of, it's my way or the highway, and he hopes that players will take that message and act positively to it, and if they won't, they'll be out. But I mean, I guess Brett Johnson just confirmed perhaps in numbers what we think might happen already.
Yeah. I mean, I had a conversation with someone the other day who had heard via a member of the squad that 4 players are sort of on the list of ones that haven't been told that they've.
Okay, the lucky 4.
And I mean, Norwood was one. Kane Vincent-Young was another. Edwards was another, because of course he was offered a contract but has now gone. And Aaron Drynan was the other, who I think really is going to be there to be a squad member. I don't think he's expected. And Paul Cook, we assume, has seen something in him, because I don't think he tore up any trees, really. He did all right, didn't he? I think in his first
few matches of the season, he looked quite good, didn't he? And then got injured.
I mean, and that's another thing. He did have, it's another player who's trying to make his way in a failing team. But when you go back to when he first signed, and you look at the quotes from Mick McCarthy, he thought he was ready to go in the team at that point, and and I've heard that the players were quite impressed with him when he first came in. They nicknamed him Murph, didn't they? Because they thought he was a similar sort of player to Daryl Murphy. But I agree. I totally agree with the point that Alan made, and I've heard this from other people at the club, that it's in part motivation. It's to try and get people to say, "Well, I'll show him," And I think this worked to some degree. And I mentioned this in the questionnaire, didn't I? Armando Dobra, who did this interview in Albania when he was with the 21s, and he was sort of, he was asked something along the lines of, what's your plans for next season, sort of thing. And he said, I want to get in Ipswich Town first team. That's what he said. He was in Albanian, so I only seen the translation. But so he is very certain that he wants to change the manager's mind as it stands. And I suspect there'll be others that feel similarly, that they want to come back for the pre-season, which is only like a week and a bit away now. And I know, and show what they can do and get themselves in the team. And so I think there's a bit of kidology. I think there's also an element of him not really seeing many of the players as indispensable. Because I think he wants to bring his own players in. And so in order to do that, he's got to shift quite a number on. And there are only this handful, this 4, or 4-ish, 4.3. There was the best joke on the website last night, that the 1.3 must be Thomas Holly because of the height. In order to bring his players in, he's got to get rid of a certain number or a number, and no one or not many are indispensable. So he'll want some of them out, but a few of them it won't matter too much, because he thinks they're all right. Do you know what I mean? Not great, but he wouldn't mind if they left. But as Brett Johnson says, it's quite hard to get rid of that number of players, or in one go. I think. I can't remember the exact quote that he said. what you just said. But he said, but it was how quickly that can be done, or I think that's quite. I think it's when you've got a squad that's as large as it was. I think it's quite hard to kind of offload as many as they need to. So I think what we'll end up with is a significant number of players that have come in and a number of those that are still here. And presumably there'll be some of those who perhaps Cook doesn't particularly want and probably play more in the 23s than in the first team. And then those that have come back with the right attitude and shown him that they've got a bit about them, that when they get criticised by a manager, they go away, get themselves fit, come back, and with the determination to show what they can do.
Which is all that we're kind of hoping for, I think.
Yeah.
And then there'll be the ones where the business hasn't got done and needs must kind of situation. And I'm thinking the likes of Toto and Ciala might be an aspect. I was expecting Janoy Danasin to have left by now. You know, players with flexibility who are kind of 6 out of 10 players. I wouldn't be surprised if a few of them are still here and they're trapped in as injuries crop up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean the other thing, of course, is that they may still be here towards the end of the transfer window, and so sort of deals will be done where they go on loan at the end of the transfer window. That kind of thing.
Yeah, make weights in maybe deals for other players in the trading. Yeah, we haven't seen too much of that yet.
I think there's definitely an element of that the likes of Toto and Janoy Benassian are here to trade. So they trade other players, and to a great degree because the club doesn't want to let players that they paid money for go on a free. I think that's a big thing. And I think that Jackson's another one. I mean, it's interesting. We've heard very little about clubs being interested in Caden Jackson so far, but I don't really see where he fits in because I don't think he played a central striking role under Paul Cook. And I think he tried him on the right side, and it was. I think elements of it he was good at, and other elements he wasn't. The defensive side of it he wasn't so good at, but that's not really a surprise, is it? It's not the game that he's played over his career. So I think he'll probably go. I think it's you're looking. I mean, I know we sort of talk about pre-season training starting next week, but we're still a little way to go before the season actually starts.
Business end,
not much tends to happen in June. In most summers, every manager always says, "I want to get my signings in early" and all this, and they're all still making signings on deadline day, aren't they?
Exactly right. Do it on the night before,
yeah.
And it might be that there's always kind of a game of chess going on. There's a deal that possibly then is a domino effect, and others happen as well. So
there's a lot of that. And the other thing with players, particularly those who are out of contract, they'll wait around and see what offers they get. And they'll assess their offers.
Which might have been a good strategy in the past, but it feels like this summer, given the amount of competition in players, other players that are going to be on freeze. A good example, I was going to briefly mention this down at Cole Switch United, which is just being filled up with Ipswich Town free signings. You look at Luke Chambers and Cole Scouse and Freddie Sears, who have opted. Chambers we know has had interest from Gillingham and I think elsewhere, and possibly Scouse did as well. Sears mentioned he'd got interest, and then you've got the likes of Alan Judge and Emma Hughes, who I'd imagine have aspirations of more than Colchester, but might find, Andy Warren and the EADT has been pretty consistent that these guys might end up there, and because they want to stay in the area. I think there's a point, and it's going to be earlier this season, where free agents will just kind of, you don't know.
Grab the light post.
To use an Alan Lee analogy about the Crystal Palace transfer, I want to be on a chair when the music stops.
Yeah,
and I do think that might happen a bit earlier this year, but
I think that's possibly right. I think. I mean, Teddy Bishop's another one. I think that Cambridge are interested in him now. I think that he'll probably see himself as a better player than Cambridge United. But
League One though, aren't they now?
And they are League One now. Yeah. And Cambridge, I think, may struggle wages-wise with him, but they're interested. But he may ultimately sort of jump at some point and say, that's I'm probably not going to get better than that. Players will always try and think that they're always try and look for better, won't they?
Well, it's human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, and so they'll wait around to what offers come in and take their time. But I suppose once pre-season training starts, I think players do start to think, the first week and they're not involved.
Yeah, the hard stuff.
They start to think, I better jump and sign somewhere. And and you might be right, but the fact there are so many players out of work that they're all a lot of them will leap quickly. And but yes, and the culture thing with Chambers and Skuse and Sears, I think Colchester wanted Sears in January, didn't they? And the other two, I know Cole Skuse is very good friends with Wayne Brown. So it suits them all. Sears still lives in Colchester area, doesn't he? And so it suits all of them very much to go there. And it would be interesting next season because Colchester's team, I think, will have Dean Gherkin in goal, won't it? A back three of Tommy Smith, Luke Chambers, and Tom Eastman. Yeah,
they want to bring Frank Newble back as well. Newbley, sorry.
And Sears
Newbley.
Together, and Cole Skuse in the centre of midfield. So. I know that they did try and move away from this thing of being always being accused of being the Ipswich Town retirement home, but it does seem they've rather gone back in that direction again at the moment. But perhaps that's to some degree needs must, in that obviously they kind of went down this road of.
Oh, it was a horrible season for them last year as well, and that lack of experience I think was telling. Yeah. I follow my brother-in-law is a Cole U fan, and he was pretty happy about the Freddie Sears news. I don't think he knows too much about Cole Skuse and Luke Chambers, but on the face of it, good experience. Yeah. But I think a lot of Cole U fans generally are kind of saying we needed experience, but maybe not Ipswich Town experience. But I can't imagine any of those guys will let them down. And
no.
Yeah, you want a comfortable season after almost going out of the Football League entirely.
Yeah, and their long-term future is being built on young players, but I think probably their young players weren't quite ready.
Yeah, they weren't ready, were they?
Someone said this to me at the beginning of last season, that who knows more about kind of academy football, didn't think that they were the expectations that they were putting on their young players were probably too high, and so it proved. So I think again, as we've said with Andre, I think fans will wish the likes of Luke Chambers and Cole Skuse and Freddie Sears well in their time at the JobServe Community Stadium.
The JobServe. And if you ever if we've got an international weekend or something, or I don't know whether I think with Norwich we certainly alternate home fixtures, don't we? I don't know whether the same is true of Colchester, but maybe we should get half-price season tickets at Colchester, given all the business we push their way. And they wear blue shirts, so
why not
squint a little bit and get yourself in trouble with Colchester fans.
I think that's. It's interesting. Funny enough, I was talking to someone yesterday about seeing Paul Cook playing for Burnley at Colchester one international weekend many years ago, when and there was bumping into quite a lot of town fans on the terraces at Layer Road that day, because we all kind of fancied a game of football, and Burnley I think had Ian Wright playing for them at the time, and so everyone went down there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's one of these weird kind of. This is like. England and the home nations, or until Simon Jordan stuck his oar in on TalkSport, where I really have no issue at all with Wales doing well. They're playing at the moment, by the way, and I've not spoiled the match. I don't want to. I'll see what it is when we go back. And Scotland similarly as well. Until they play England, I want all the home nations to, but they hate England with an absolute passion, which is historic, I get. But it's Colchester's a similar situation. I've no ill feeling towards Colchester. I'm sure most Cole U fans are pretty chilled out about Ipswich.
Yeah.
As soon as you start speaking about Ipswich,
aren't we? I think that's the thing. I think England and it's that kind of we're the big boys in that, aren't we?
Yeah, looking down, patronising them.
Exactly. So I think it's kind of I suppose we do. Oh yeah, we all. I think we do kind of quite like our ex-players to do well when they're at Colchester, and. I went to one of their pre-season photo shoots once to do interviews with town players, because they had so many. I think at the time, I think it was Bell and Mick Stockwell and Gavin Johnson and all that sort of.
Steve Whitten.
Steve Whitten may have been Gavin Williams. Geraint Williams was the manager, I think, and yeah.
Well, let's I think we've done well with the news there. I think let's focus on the questionnaire. Let's drag ourselves back into the past, Phil.
That's
and
okay,
and recall what an absolute
yeah.
horrible horror show the 2021 season is. I love the TWTD questionnaire, and
Good.
you guys, you get a good, what was it, 1,700
Yeah,
responses.
1,700 something this year. We've had more than 3,000 in some previous years, but I think when the season's a bit more, when there's yeah, people are a bit happier about it. I think
Yeah, I
probably.
think next season's right. Yeah, it might be
Yeah.
easier. The trouble is you've got very specific questions about the opposition and matches of the season, and my brain had done really well to compartmentalize that and put it into the kind of long-term storage bin
Yeah.
in case I need to go back and access it at some point in the future. So it's really always difficult for me to remember when it's been a crap season anything positive. So I've got the goal of the season one because I'm interested
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
your thoughts on that one. But and you know, it's a good prompt to think back at bits of the season, but unfortunately, there are no real highlights to consider. So it is this season. I can understand why maybe turn out a little bit lower. Um, do you provide a submission? By the way, I know you provide obviously
I
commentary on the
didn't.
on.
Well, yes, I think I did actually. I tested it, so
Oh, cool.
yeah,
There you go. You're the first in.
I think it stays on the system. So yeah, yeah.
Let's start with a nice, easy one to get
I probably
ourselves
can't
off.
remember what I said.
Oh well, I'm gonna ask you now. Let's see if I can. Oh, my special tabs are out of order, so I'm gonna have to. I wanted to. The first one I wanted to do was play all-time player, but I think I might have. There we go. Got it, and I can share that now. Sorry. Padding for time. Favorite ever town player. I've kind of skipped through a couple of the early questions, but just very quickly, and this is something that we reflect on our podcast as well. The age of Ipswich Town supporters on the basis of the questionnaire getting a little bit older, maybe confirm some suspicions about the younger generation, which the Game Changer guys, the Three Lions, have talked about trying to ignite some passion back there. Also, overwhelmingly male, which I guess isn't a surprise, but always interested to hear ways we can improve that. And I think that's something both TWTD and Blue Monday would agree on there. I also think the favourite town player ever situation is one that gives us an understanding of the demographic as well. So Johnny Walk is there along with, I mean, other is the winner, isn't it? But Johnny Walk is the specific player that has the biggest one. Does that surprise you, or is that starting to be eroded away by Matt Holland and Marcus Stewart and Pablo?
Well, Walkie has been top for years now, with the exception of the year that Kevin Beattie died, in which Beattie went back to number one, which I think is understandable in that in that circumstance. And I included the quote from Kieran when he was talking about Walkie when I was doing the best 11s with him during the lockdown, and he said that Beattie was the best player we've ever had, but Walkie's the greatest player we've ever had.
Okay.
And I think there is a difference, and that Kevin Beattie sort of was to some degree an unfulfilled talent. I know, I mean, it's difficult for me to say really because I was too young to remember him at his greatest, but we know that the expectation, the way that he was going to have 100 caps for England, you know, and go on to, and the way that Bobby Robson talked about him as the greatest player that he had, that he managed, along with the Brazilian Ronaldo, and so. And although he obviously won the FA Cup, it was Walkie that won the FA Cup and was a key man in the UEFA Cup, and then came back again for two more spells and was still playing in the 91-92 season, then back in the Premier League. And so, for perhaps sort of achievement as well as ability, because you can't not Walkie's ability, can you, by any stretch of the imagination? But I think he allies the two, perhaps. Whereas perhaps Beat was a better player, maybe that Walkie achieved more, and so I think that's a fair assessment that John Walk's the greatest player and Kevin Beattie's the best player. Matt Holland, sort of talismanic figure from that side, wasn't he? The sort of the promotion and UEFA Cup team. Marcus Stewart, the main man in that team. And as you say, there's a demographic aspect that quite a lot of people. I mean, I was probably 13 when Paul Mariner left. Do you know what I mean? And
I just wonder whether Walkie's longevity has worked in his favour in this role, because
I think that's probably
my first formative experiences watching Ipswich, Walk was in the team, and the Premier League era. I remember the free kick against Leicester in 95-96 on the telly, and so maybe that's a factor here as well. But
I certainly agree with that he has that. People in their late 30s, maybe, can probably remember him. Probably that's fair enough, isn't it? Whereas you'd have to be a fair bit older to. I mean, I don't really. I remember watching Beat, but I was 10 or 11, and his career was coming to an end at that point. And our readership is pretty much across the. It's fairly broad, isn't it? I think it's surprising that it's. Although I think perhaps it's lower in the 20s, but I think that in the sort of people in their sort of 20s and teens. But I think that's possibly something to do with the way the club is at the moment. That the support has drifted away in that age group. I know that's something that they sought to address a couple of years ago when they introduced under 19s tickets and under 12s tickets and whatever, didn't they? Because they were looking at doing their own surveys and looking at the lack of people in that fans coming through in that age group. And the other thing you, of course, note about the top 10 that we've got here is that the one that played most recently, I would guess, is Pablo Cunyago.
Yeah.
And when did he leave? I reckon, 2010, something like that?
I was going to say, yeah.
So that's 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And no one has got in that. So, I think that says a lot about where the club has been in the last little while, doesn't it, really?
Agreed.
Perhaps had new figures bursting into that top 10.
Well, let's put up the players that tried in last season, and this one made me laugh out of most of all of them. Who player of the season 2020-21, and the winner of that is none of the above.
I know.
That's a pretty telling stat, isn't it? I mean, James Wilson, again, in terms of specific names that came out, James Wilson, and I was surprised to see Chambers in there, but maybe again similar to him getting Player of the Year a couple of years ago, maybe people wanted to demonstrate their appreciation of what he'd done for the club. Norwood in there, but none of the above.
I think that's right.
Which was newly introduced, wasn't it? The none of the above category.
I never put that in before, but it was partly because I remember speaking to this Mark Ramsey at the Supporters Club, and they were really sort of umming and ahhing about whether to do their Player of the Year because they thought it was for the first time, and there were no outstanding candidates, were there? No. And yes, I think it probably none of the above. I mean, we did think about doing it in the relegation season from the Premier League, really. That again, it wasn't a season when. I suppose there were players in that year that Marcus Bent almost saved us, didn't he, that year? But it was another season where people didn't really feel anyone was deserving of a Player of the Year award,
So maybe, but I've just chucked up the Young Player of the Year because
we felt it was a little unfair. I mean, actually, coming back to that again, James Wilson winning it. I mean, in a season where it's not been great, a player who made 18 appearances and was just a solid defender. That probably says a lot, doesn't it? And you can't.
He's already gone as well. He's left.
Yeah, I mean that's what he did. I mean that was his job, and he did it pretty well. And as you say, Chambers, I think he was a good captain for us in very difficult circumstances, and he probably won the Player of the Year 2 years ago when we got relegated because people appreciated that, and I think people. Appreciated his endeavour in the role,
and off the field stuff as well.
That's what I mean. Really.
Players
not just the on the field stuff, but the overall role as a captain and how he did it. Because I think he was a good captain, certainly, and the way that players talk about him and have talked about him at the club, I think illustrates that. But anyway, young player,
and no surprises here, I guess. And again, a player that might not be here next season, but we hope as we talked about. Liam Gibbs is in there as well, and obviously some speculation about him.
Well, Dobra, I think I think Dobra, he's a bit like we were saying about Andre, that he didn't, by the way that Andre didn't get runs in the side. Dobra, I think, was so, every time he got his chance, was so desperate to impress that he was sort of trying too hard. Every time he got the ball, he was trying to beat 3 or 4 men, you know. And I think the latter stage of the season where he played 2 or 3 games in a row, I think he calmed down a bit and started to play more measured football. So I do think in his case, very much, it's Paul Cook trying to motivate him, and because I think he sees something in him. I don't think he'd have played him in the last few games if he didn't see something in him.
It just seems strange, didn't it? Yeah, I agree with that.
I think he looks like a talent, someone that in the next 2 or 3 years could, certainly in League One, make a major impression. Andre, we talked about. Flynn, I think, had Flynn and Luke Wolfenden had disappointing seasons, didn't they, really? But they were both a bit in and out the side, weren't they? I think perhaps Luke Wolfenden was maybe a victim of the squad being a bit too big, that when things weren't going well, Paul Lambert had the option just to sort of shift everybody out and put other people in. And now you wonder if Mick McCarthy had been manager and maybe Luke Wolfenden had a couple of dodgy games. I can remember Mick talking about how him as a player, that he had a bad period and he was at Celtic and he was getting a lot of stick from the crowd and whatever. But Billy McNeil kept him in the team because, well, you're my best defender, one of my best defenders. Eventually, you'll get back into form. So he may have been a bit of a victim to that. Wolves, Flynn, a difficult season for him with all the transfer speculation at the beginning and then
injury and
injury. Yeah, so it was stop, start. But I think he'll probably go. I think that he's. I don't think he's entirely happy here. I think he probably thinks he can play at a higher level. And
he'd be right about that. And it just feels like he's had a really unfortunate couple of years, because even the transfer saga last summer with Crystal Palace, I didn't think was particularly handled well, and I also think perhaps there was some undue influence by supporter unrest about the transfer fee. I don't think we'll get 1.7 whatever it was this time around, and the same for Caden Jackson actually. I remember speaking about this on the podcast last year, that we kind of lauded the fact we turned down multi-million transfer bids during a pandemic, and I honestly think it hurts as football fans. But sometimes, Mark Ashton, I don't think would have thought twice about those fees. I think he might have got a little bit more out of it, and maybe a chunky sell-on or something. But I don't think we'd have hesitated to accept those kind of bids.
No, I think
last year, and we certainly won't this time around. The trouble is, they'll probably be a fraction of what they were last year.
Yeah, because that's how the market is. But of course, equally, we'll be paying less money for the players that we're bringing in. So that's it swings and roundabouts on that front, isn't it? So down to I think Liam Gibbs. I think there's an element of the two sides, both sides sort of waiting for the other to blink. I think.
Okay.
And now we've got to the point where, and I don't think they're a million miles apart from, as I understand it, and other clubs are waiting in the wings. But he could end up in this sort of situation where he leaves Ipswich and is trying to set himself up with another club. And the other club, of course, have to agree compensation with Town, or it goes to a tribunal, and he could find himself sort of in no man's land for a little bit.
It does feel. I think. I don't know whether it was part of the Kieran Dyer interview, but someone like Dylan Crowe, his experience, because I think he was really mooted for a big move. I think, and was it Huddersfield possibly, or maybe Brentford, and that didn't happen. And then he never really found his way back into favour.
No, he's not academy. Injuries as well, isn't it? And
that too, but and Charlie Brown as well. He might have something to say. Dyer certainly spoke about that, didn't he?
There's a few players, aren't there, really, that have kind of had. I don't know. It's a difficult situation, isn't it? I mean, wherever he goes, he's not going to be a first team player. I don't think he's going to be a first team player at Ipswich, is he? And the sorts of Premier League clubs that he's looking at that are sort of understood to be looking at him, they'll bring him in to play in the 23s, and then maybe send him out on loan in a year or so's time. He's only 18, isn't he? And so you're talking about him, and he's 3 years younger than Andre, so he's got a little way to go yet, I think. And if you're looking at the squad that we're going to have or expecting to have in the year ahead, which is obviously a better and probably more experienced squad than we've had this year, I don't think he's going to get much of a look in, unless he's outstanding in the 23s, of course, and or the EFL Trophy or whenever he might get an opportunity. So he's an outsider for that, and so, but equally, it's probably his best bet to stay here and try and push on towards the first team than a Premier League club, because obviously you find yourself. As you say, Charlie Brown is a good example, who I think ended up leaving for the MK Dons on a free transfer. Yep. And yes, we've seen it with plenty of players that have gone to bigger clubs and sort of their careers have drifted.
So fingers crossed, some common sense prevails on.
I hope it gets done, because he's another. He's a Suffolk boy, isn't he? And you want to see Suffolk boys stay at the club and come through.
This is another one of those amusing ones. Well, not amusing, and I think you commented as well. How Luke Chambers, if you were to take predictions at the start of the season about who would be at the top of this poll, you'd have bet got long odds on Luke Chambers being 1 and 2. But that Blackpool goal, I sent that to my brother-in-law when Chambers was about to sign for them. It is, easily the best goal that I could recall of this season. So no surprise.
Great goal. I mean, actually, that day at Blackpool was a goal of the season competition on its own, wasn't it? Really, some very
Bishop's
good goal. Bishop's goal was really. We were sitting in the press box discussing which was the best of the four, so great. That was a really terrific strike. I think he said that was the best goal he's ever scored in his career. I had to look up the Bristol Rovers one because I couldn't remember it.
Is that a glancing header?
It's sort of he makes a run towards the near post, about sort of 8-10 yards out, and sort of heads it back across. It was a good, decent header, and it was. I mean, that was, yes. You think about these games, 3-0 that day, wasn't it? It looked like the season was going to. It was all getting off in a fantastic way, but
no, we all knew that it was going to be a mirror image of the season before.
It's very bizarre, isn't it? And yes, so there we go. And Alan Judge, of course, scored some really good goals. Probably
the free kick. Yeah, was that the one? Yeah, trying to remember. Doncaster. Yeah,
but there was 2 or 3 really good goals he scored last season, and I think he'll just be disappointed that he didn't get more in his time here, really, and it took so long for him to score goals. But there you go. He's another one who may well end up at Colchester, of course.
Yes. Ipswich Town. Best side faced. Yeah, this one, I think Peterborough was the easy choice here, because Hull could not possibly win this one having lost to us at home. I hate this chant with a passion, but the kind of "how crap must you be" chant was kind of built for that exact match against Hull, who were flying, I think, at the time, and then we'd be rubbish, and then Jimmy Walker and Matt Gill going to name the team, and we get a 1-0 away win and break that top 6 hoodoo. So I couldn't give it to Hull. Crewe is an interesting one. Style of play presumably led a lot of people to do that one.
I think they played really well at Portman Road, didn't they? We won 1-0. I think it was Teddy Bishop scored, didn't he? Relatively late. And but they dominated the first half, and if they'd had a decent striker and taken opportunities, they would have won. They were much better than us that day. They weren't as good at Gresty Road, I didn't think, which was 1-1. But I think it was a fairly conditioned
poor game, wasn't it?
Again, it was Peterborough. I didn't think there was much between us and Peterborough at Peterborough on their on the mud flats, or they are at London Road. I mean, actually, it's quite. I mean, that we were pretty terrible, and Paul Lambert tried to play long ball football, and actually that surface, although it didn't have a lot of grass on it, Peterborough showed you could pass it around on it, even if they didn't play particularly well that day. And as you say, Hull, when we played, I thought they were very good down here. But down up there again, that was quite a wind. That was quite a windy day. It was quite a wind. Well, you see the goal that Miles Kenlock makes a sort of 70-yard diagonal cross, doesn't he, to Norwood to score. I think that might have been conditions. May have been a leveller that day to some degree. And once we went ahead, I mean, having said that, we were pretty solid, weren't we, this season? I think we were something like 4th in a fewest goals conceded table in the division. So
and
once we
these
got
are
our
all kind
noses
of
in front,
Peterborough's narrow defeats, aren't they? Both of them, and
well, I think that when we've got our noses in front, I think that's been part of the problem. Really, we didn't get our noses in front enough, really, and so we were able to kind of, on occasion, sort of hold off withstand what was thrown at us by teams when we were ahead. And then, I mean, the sort of outstanding performances we kind of, when we've looked good in the second half of the season, Blackpool at home was one. The final day of the season against Fleetwood, people kind of say, "Oh, how terrific! We played terrific football in those games." We played terrific football in those games because we were 2-0 up.
it's
quite
psychological, isn't
easy
it?
Winning, isn't it? And we didn't find ourselves in that circumstance very often, did we?
And that's the kind of the start of the season was where we did that, and again, you kind of think that we maybe built up a false sense of security, or maybe overestimated our qualities because we'd been able to do that against lesser opposition, which I think all of us have been talking about, and the real quiz. And then immediately, as soon as I can't even remember. As I said, I've put last season to one side. It wasn't Doncaster, was it?
But it's telling that first 6 games we win 5 and draw 1. First bit of difficulty, first sort of hurdle, we come up against Doncaster, and we don't just lose; we lose 4-1.
And we take the lead in that game, and I think this is possibly worse. Is we take the lead and then get battered afterwards. I mean, we helped them out big time, but
underbelly, I think.
Yeah, fragility was definitely there, wasn't it? A slight change of pace on this one, and this is one where I'd be interested on the club's kind of view on this one. I've got to pick how do you rate the 2021 away kit, which was. I think I wouldn't go as far as saying it's Marmite, but it wasn't a classic, put it that way. And the kind of results here, the majority is average, but largely it's average and above is the majority here. There's another question you guys always ask every year, which is how long should the kits cycle run for, 1 or 2 years? The reason I picked this one is because this kit is supposedly the most sustainable kit ever, at least for Ipswich. And I know that Steve M, who's a poster on TWTD, has said this. It might have been him who's started this thought, but I think a lot of us are thinking a sustainable kit that you then do away with after one season feels a bit of a contradiction, doesn't it? Do the club have the club ever spoken or thought about this? Do you think? I'm not sure. The Three Lions guys, obviously a lot of it retail is contingent on shirt sales and turnover, but it did feel like the away kit, and maybe this sustainable one, it's a bit of a weird statement to make.
It is. I agree with you entirely. Yeah, and it's there's no reason other than commercial to have new kit every year, new home kit and new away kit. And I do wonder whether it even works that way to some degree in sort of, years where things are not that great and people are not kind of buying loads of shirts that I think, but there you go. I suppose, they must do their sums and realise it works for them. But the sustainability argument is ridiculous, really. What happens to these shirts? They get sent out to the developing world via.
I should give them all to Simon Milton, should they? Shouldn't they? And maybe this one ends up as a third kit because the claret one ended up as a third kit, but then they changed the sponsor. So it just I can ethically I always feel a little bit conflicted, but I keep mine. That's not being chucked away. I just wonder about anyway. It'll end up in one of their kit room sales, won't it? So the home kit. Very popular, and again, similar. I don't know whether this was a thought on the podcast or elsewhere, but one of our great shirts, obviously paying homage to one of the greatest moments in our history, and it's worn by arguably the worst team in living memory. Well, certainly in living memory because of that. Anyway,
I know. I totally agree with you. It's unfortunate that. Yes, what should have been a tribute season has fallen flat on a number of angles with no fans there and the performances on the field as well and no big dinner and all those kind of things. It's been unfortunate, but hopefully those things will be the dinner, all those kind of things. The stars of the legends of the past will be honoured at some point in the future. Maybe this coming.
Hopefully, Luke Chambers might come back and wave to the crowd when he's got a 2-week suspension, a 2-match suspension or something. Because I just felt like his departure was kind of, it should have had a little bit more fanfare around it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to maybe plough through these because these are all going to be of a similar nature here. How would you rate Paul Lambert's performance? So someone voted very good and good. And I don't know whether what's the noise of. I was going to say, what's the noise of Norwich fans skewing the results? Are you tempted to kind of skim these ones out?
No, I just left it as it was, to be honest, because the overall picture is there, isn't it?
and arguably, you'd say the entirety of his reign, you could make the same judgment.
I think it was almost identical last year. I think it was almost identical. And which it's a bit of a damning indictment, really, that a manager whose performance was viewed as so poor by the fans was allowed to continue to be manager for February by the time he was fired. I think that's
and
the end came so much later than it should have done. It's illustrative of the lack of structure. And
accountability, which perfect plug for Alan Lee, by the way, which we'll come on to. But Alan Lee talks about this. The second part is he goes into a lot of detail about the kind of the symptoms of the kind of stuff that we're now talking about here.
Yeah, exactly, and that just showed that no one had the power or the strength. I mean, you had this sort of strange structure of the manager, and this goes back to when Roy Keane was manager as well, and the manager didn't. We actually had a chief executive at that point, but the manager didn't answer to the chief executive. The manager's line manager was the owner. So you've got a chief executive who's to some degree a bit of a lame duck when it comes to talking to the manager and dictating things. So, and in the circumstances prior to the takeover, there was no chief executive there. So it kind of, people within the club there was no real boss of the manager. Do you know what I mean? And I think
it provided lots of different things as well, and we both know lots of people who are working their asses off at Portman Road only to be micromanaged or to be not given the resources to do their job. And I guess the fortunate thing is that time is now over, and the early signs from Mark Ashton and the new ownership is time and care will be put into things that matter.
And you're seeing a structure put in, and because there was no figure at the club that kind of everything was accountable to in that sense. A chief executive, everything ended up on his desk, which is just it's just sort of poor organised, poor governance. I think I used in there.
And I had the result for the assessment of the season, which was very poor by a long way.
Yeah,
and you got a very specific question for the current times about rating Marcus Evans' time in charge of the club. Average is a bigger chunk than what I thought, and obviously they're very good and good. The Norwich fans are back here, but poor and very poor again, dominating here, and I guess none of this is a surprise, is it?
No, I think. I said in the sort of post amble, he missed his chance, didn't he? The opportunity he really had was when he first came in, when Ipswich were one of the richer Championship clubs, and unfortunately he brought Roy Keane in, and he brought Roy Keane in without enough due diligence. I knew someone who had business connections with people who were on the board at Sunderland at the time, and apparently Sunderland were never approached. What's it like working with Roy Keane? No one.
Right. Oh wow.
And so he picks a manager who is what's the word?
A challenging character.
A challenging character is a good way of putting it. Really, he's not a
complex character. Yeah.
I think what you needed was an experienced. I mean, obviously, what he wanted Roy to do was come and replicate the job he did at Sunderland, and but what he really needed was a Mick McCarthy maybe, but someone who was tried and tested in the Championship, and a Neil Warnock. I mean, I'm thinking of the style of football is not kind of what Ipswich fans would go for, but managers that have been there, done it a few times. You know, those sorts of figures, and rather than someone who'd kind of who'd had a little bit of success and was a big name.
But compare the first actions of Game Changer and Marcus Evans, and we've on Blue Monday we've talked about this kind of constantly. Is Paul Cook was in place, and I guess we're fortunate that Marcus Evans and the new owners saw eye to eye on that appointment, such that it wasn't an issue. But the first thing they've been doing is Mark Ashton in the door, CEO, and everything kind of builds around that. And that was the biggest failing for Marcus Evans repeatedly, is either picking the wrong people to build something around, or not even giving them the proper job. As in, you're just kind of the face. You're Ian Milne, for example. You'll be my, the decisions are mine, but you'll have to justify them to the press on my behalf.
I think
that was
right.
his job. And Marcus Evans not getting someone who knew what they were doing, like Mark Ashton, to run the club for him, is why it ultimately was never going to work for me.
Yeah, well, I think first of all he came in and Derek Bowden was here, wasn't he? Still, and he kept David Sheepshanks on as chairman. And I think that I'm not sure quite where. I don't think they saw entirely eye to eye on everything. And then he brought Simon Clegg in, who was an experienced sports administrator, but was not an experienced football administrator. And I think that the sports that he'd been involved in, and very successfully, and continues to be involved in sport very successfully, and continues to follow Town, by the way. I quite often get texts from him when there's a decent result or a dreadful result or a management appointee or a takeover. He texts me about a takeover. Not the kind of appointment, not the experienced appointments, again, similar to what I was saying about Roy. And I suppose the thing about it was that he then continued to make those sorts of errors.
I want to drag us into the present. I think there was a question about the owners, which I can't find. But what I will put up is very quickly, just a bit on Paul Cook, because obviously tricky circumstances. So I think people, an honest assessment, and not an unreasonable expectation to have for wanted better, but I think mitigating circumstances, knowing what we all know now. So how would you rate his performance since he took charge? Average, and even a big chunk of poor, actually. That's a pretty stark outcome. But then compare that to the score on is he the man to take us forward? It's a very different picture, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you've got 80% positive.
I think that he would probably agree with the assessment of his performance, because I think he would feel that he made a lot of mistakes. And obviously results weren't what they should have been and what we hoped for. And when he came in, we had a decent run and were in with a chance of the playoffs, weren't we? But I think there is this understanding from fans, I suppose, that the squad was that he inherited was a failing squad, and that it had failed over a couple of years. And so perhaps he was trying to kind of get something out of players that, and I think we're talking about a squad rather than about individual players. I think that those individual players, if they were then put in a different squad and a different circumstance, some of them might go to Sunderland or wherever and do all right. Gwion Edwards might go to Wigan and do terrifically there. All these players will probably go to and do all right. But as a group, I just think that they were shot. They'd had such a bad time of it. Management had been so poor, and this sort of losing mentality had developed over a period of time. I remember people used to talk about Neil Warnock when he was at Sheffield United, because he was a Sheffield United supporter, talking like a supporter because of that. Do you know what I mean? And I suppose I know Bulcock's not an Ipswich supporter, but some of the comments he made were a bit like what supporters would have been saying in pubs had they been allowed in pubs. You know what I mean? Or the comments that were on the terraces. And I think that is that honesty that is perhaps a benefit in some circumstances, because I think players know what they'll get from it, and they know that what they're being told by him is the truth a lot of the time, probably. But perhaps at the same time, as a manager, if you're trying to get a team to play and you need them to play for the next few games, as he did, it's probably not best to come out and say publicly that you don't rate them and that they're all going to be gone at the end of the season.
Yeah, play the long game a little bit.
Yeah.
And just to finish on this one, which I think overwhelmingly possible, where will the Blues finish in 2020, 21, 22? And, all of the context of what you've just been talking about and what, the quotes from Brett Johnson about high turnover and the roster being slashed down to just 10% of what we've got at the moment. All of the stuff about the Marcus Evans era, all of these new faces, the transfer business that needs to get done. But 25% top two, 55.5% predicting or expecting, I might say, playoffs. The expectations have understandably gone up.
I think expectations were quite high. I think expectations for Ipswich in this division are always going to be high. I think they're probably
not unreasonably.
I think that the thing that has increased is belief, because I think that last season, although there was this expectation, there wasn't a whole lot of belief we were going to get promoted. There wasn't a lot of belief in that team. There wasn't a lot of belief in Paul Lambert, was there? But I think that with Paul Cook, and coming back to sort of the previous question, that he obviously didn't do a fantastic job in the first few months of his time at Town at the end of last season, but that reputation he's got from his previous clubs, fans trust that, and fans have an expectation and a belief that he's the man to do the job, and that the players that he will bring in. Because at the moment, of course, we're talking without knowing what the squad's going to be. But
exactly right. Yeah.
Too much in much detail at all. But yeah, I mean, I was sort of slightly surprised that people are saying 55.5% playoffs rather than 40% top two. I think, I don't know. It might just be the fact that it's probably going to be quite a strong division with people like Sheffield Wednesday, and although obviously they've got their own problems, but clubs that you would think traditionally would be doing very well in this division. Sunderland are obviously still in this league, aren't they? And yeah, maybe a little surprised that more people aren't thinking top two, but then perhaps we're all a bit wounded.
Maybe that does, and does reflect that I think people do expect a kind of, to go all corporate for a second, but the kind of forming, norming stages, that's going to happen. The kind of forming of the team and it being performing, that doesn't happen overnight. And I think maybe people understand that.
If it's anything like this year, this season has been, I think the top two, Peterborough and Hull, they weren't really consistent teams that ploughed off into the sunset, were they? But they sort of established themselves as the least inconsistent of the teams towards the top of the division.
Like Coventry did the year before.
Yes. And so, yeah, we there may, even if it takes a little while to get going, I think there may still be time. You get to sort of, if we're...
Look at Oxford. Oxford in a shocking form at the start of the season, didn't they?
Yeah, so I think you can come through in that way. I think that's a perfect example. And in their case, having had the bit of a shock of the playoffs the previous year, I think there's always that sort of playoff hangover. And we'll probably have a bit of a kind of, it might take us a little... but you've seen teams before that have been kind of formed overnight. They win their first few games and then they just keep going, don't they? And so we'll have to see. But it's I think that there's certainly a greater expectation, a greater belief. I think that's the difference. The belief is the difference. That Paul Cook, in Paul Cook, we've got a manager who can do the job, and that the squad he will bring in will be a cut above. And of course the owners. That I think there's already, although I think the question I asked is kind of first reflections of the owners, which is exactly right, because all we know is kind of first impressions, aren't they, at the moment?
Yeah. It's words now. It needs the action, don't we, at some point?
Yeah.
And if the signings and the off-field recruitment is anything to go by, then they're delivering on that. And fingers crossed, we're in Portman Road day one, and Portman Road's had some attention given to it and all that stuff. That's what we want.
Yeah, that's the thing. We've had a lot of promises so far, and I think people are confident they will carry out those promises. And I think the signings we've made have been probably the first illustration of that, and a bit of tidying of Portman Road, and of course, the recruitment of the staff that we've had as well, of course, off-field staff. So yeah, I think so far all the boxes that we were anticipating being ticked are being ticked. it's now a case of getting it right on the field.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Phil, that's great. Thank you so much for that and your insight and assessment of the TWTD Questionnaire 2021, which you can find the results. You can find the pie charts and Phil's assessment on twtd.co.uk, at TWTD UK on the Twitter as well. Anywhere else you want us to go looking, Phil? TWTD stuff. Join the
well.
Are you on the Facebook? There you go.
On Facebook somewhere or other, yeah. But yes, I think that's. I think people can find us.
That's good stuff. Just worth. I've mentioned it a couple of times. Just very quickly get your thoughts on Alan Lee. We've got a 2-part interview, another Blue Monday TWTD collaboration show there. I've listened to it because I edited it. The first part, some really fascinating insights from his playing career. I've put a clip up of been talking about scoring at Norwich. Part 2 out on Friday. I guess, unfortunately, sadly, includes some similar stuff that Kieran but talked about. But Alan is pretty frank and honest about his impressions of it, which ultimately led him to sadly leave the club and pursue opportunities somewhere else. But great to hear from him about his playing career and the Crystal Palace stuff and Neil Warnock. But unfortunately, it's similar stuff to what we've been talking about of the Marcus Evans era. Yes,
I think probably not too much, but I don't think people will probably be entirely surprised that all was not the most. Things were not running in the most clockwork or like an well-oiled machine. I think it's probably. I think it's best people listen to it and see what they make of it. It is interesting listening, and I think perhaps it's something that Alan's been sort of wanting to talk about for a while. And I think he and other players, other people involved in the club or around the club, there's been a kind of frustration over the last few years.
I was going to say frustration is the word that you pick up when you listen to it, and frustration as well that things could have been different, but unfortunately, it didn't pan that way.
Yeah, and I think he has a lot of interesting things to say. I think he's a lot of interesting things to say about football generally, and about Town, the club. Clearly, he has a great deal of affection for, and is a very sort of genuine football person, I think. And
great, yeah,
it comes across.
And now starting a separate career as a financial advisor, which we found out is a nice exclusive for the podcast. So that was exciting. So so part 1 already available on the Blue Monday YouTube and on our podcast feed, and you can find links on Phil's site and obviously in Blue Monday on Twitter, Blue Monday ITFC. I think we can't link to stuff on Instagram until we've got 1 million followers. So on the Facebook as well, you can find us there too, and just subscribe, and then the shows will just appear magically without you even having to do anything. Part 2 out on Friday, as I said, the coaching one, some really fascinating insights. Thanks to you and Ben for doing all the hard work, and obviously big thanks to Alan for being so generous with his time as well.
Thank you for doing it.
Oh wow. The nerdy stuff is fine. It's all the good bit is finding the clips, the goal clips to chuck in there. So I will you can go and find a few goals from Alan's spell at Ipswich in that first video as well. And hopefully a few more to come as well. So we'll keep people informed as negotiations continue. Phil, thank you so much for your time and all the hard work you do at TWTD and the great questionnaire and so on. And I'm sure we'll be back chatting about stuff before a ball is kicked in the summer. So until then, I'll let you say goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, goodbye to everyone.
Thanks for watching or listening to the Blue Monday podcast. And thanks to those of you who have kindly supported the channel via Acast or YouTube donations. You can follow us at the usual places on social media, and don't forget to subscribe so that you get our new shows first.